Something has gone flat, and you've been pretending you don't notice. Not everything, not all at once. It's more specific than that. It's the Sunday morning when you drive home from a service that was lively, warm, professionally produced, and you sit in the parking lot for a moment before starting the engine, not sure why you can't quite go yet. The music was good. The pastor was engaging. The coffee was genuinely excellent. And yet you come home less than you arrived. Or it's the conversation with your adult child about how the grandchildren are being raised. The one you don't have, because you've already decided staying silent, is less costly than the look you'll get if you say what you actually think. And what you actually think isn't even fully formed. It's a feeling, more than a thought. Something is missing from those children's world. Something you can't name without sounding like you're simply defending the way things were done when you were young. You've probably told yourself it's nostalgia, that the world changes, and every generation thinks the next one is losing something essential, and maybe that's all this is. But here's the thing. You don't entirely believe that. And the part of you that doesn't believe it, the part that sits in the parking lot, that stays quiet at the dinner table, that part is right, not nostalgic. Right. What you've been feeling has a name. Russell Kirk gave it one. And by the time this video is over, you'll know what was taken, how it was taken, and why it felt for so long like it might be your fault. It wasn't. There is a word Kirk used that most people have never heard. He didn't invent it. He borrowed it from Edmund Burke, the 18th century Irish statesman who watched the French Revolution from across the Channel and understood, before almost anyone else did, what was actually being destroyed. The word is imagination, not imagination in the sense we usually mean. Not fantasy or creativity or daydreaming. Kirk, following Burke, meant something far more specific and far more serious than that. He called it the moral imagination. And in The Conservative Mind, published in 1953, he described it as the faculty by which human beings perceive the ethical reality embedded in the world around them. Not reason exactly, not feeling exactly. Something prior to both, a kind of sight, the capacity to look at another human being and see not just a body with preferences, but a person carrying inherent dignity. To look at a marriage and see not just a contract between two parties who find each other agreeable, but a covenant that reaches backward into the lives of those who came before and forward into the lives of those not yet born. To look at a nation and see not just an economy or a government, but a partnership, Kirk's word, between the dead, the living, and the unborn. This is the faculty animals don't have. A dog is loyal, and that is real and good. But a dog cannot perceive that loyalty is a moral claim, that it participates in something that transcends the individual relationship. The moral imagination is the organ of that perception. Without it, the world is still technically present. You can still see the church, the grandchildren, the flag, but it has lost its depth, its weight, the thing that made it matter. Kirk believed this faculty was not automatic. It had to be cultivated through great literature, through ceremony, through the continuity of tradition, through the kind of worship that did not try to explain the mystery but invited the worshiper to inhabit it. The moral imagination, he argued, was the inheritance that civilization passed from one generation to the next, not through ideology, through transmission, and he believed it could be lost. In Enemies of the Permanent Things, published in 1969, Kirk named the two chief ways it is lost. He called them the idyllic imagination and the diabolic imagination. The diabolic imagination is the more obvious enemy, the deliberate inversion of moral order, the literature that celebrates cruelty, the art that takes transgression as its highest aspiration. You know it when you see it. Kirk saw it in the avant-garde of his own era, and you can see where it went from there, but it's the idyllic imagination that is the more dangerous enemy for the audience of this video. Because it doesn't look like an enemy. It looks like kindness. The idyllic imagination is the vision that human beings are naturally good, that suffering is always an external imposition, that the purpose of every institution, the church, the school, the family, is to affirm and comfort the people inside it. It is the Rousseauian dream. Strip away the demands, the hierarchy, the mystery, the moral weight, and what's left will be pure, freer, more genuinely human. It sounds generous. It feels generous. And that is exactly why Kirk considered it so corrosive. When the idyllic imagination takes hold of a church, something specific happens. The hard passages get softer. The sermons get more affirming. The music gets more accessible. The mystery, the thing that can't quite be explained, only inhabited, gets translated into something manageable, something that fits inside a 45-minute service with parking validation. The goal becomes making the congregation feel good about themselves and good about coming. And those are real goods. Kirk would never deny that, but they are not the church's first good. And when the first good is quietly replaced by the second, the soul knows. It can't always say what it knows, but it knows. The hunger you carry home from a Sunday morning that was, by every measurable standard, a success. That hunger is not spiritual failure. It is accurate perception. The moral imagination is registering an absence. The faculty is working exactly as it should. What it's perceiving is real. Kirk wrote this in 1969. He was describing the tendencies of his own moment, the drift he saw beginning in universities, in mainline Protestantism, in the cultural mood of the post-war West. He did not live to see a sociologist put numbers on it. But the numbers came. In 2005, a researcher named Christian Smith at Notre Dame published a study of the religious and spiritual lives of American teenagers. What he found, and what the data named for the first time, was a dominant mode of religious belief that had become, without anyone deciding it, the de facto faith of a significant portion of American Christianity. He called it moralistic therapeutic deism. The core beliefs, as his data reconstructed them, God exists and wants people to be nice and fair. The central goal of life is to be happy and feel good about yourself. God does not need to be particularly involved in your life unless you need something. And good people go to heaven when they die. There is no cross in that faith, no covenant, no demand, no mystery. Nothing that requires the moral imagination to perceive, because nothing in it carries weight beyond the individual's felt experience. Smith's research was about teenagers, but the data pointed to something that had been happening in the adult catechesis for a generation before those teenagers were born. The theological environment those young people inhabited, affirming, therapeutic, non-demanding, had been built by adults who, one decision at a time, in good faith and with genuine pastoral care, had made the idyllic imagination the operating logic of the American church. Kirk saw the mechanism in 1969. The sociologist found the body in 2005. And you felt it in the parking lot on Sunday morning, years before you had a name for either. Now, if you've been sitting with this for a few minutes, you may be asking the question the video has been building toward and hasn't quite answered yet. If this is civilizational, if this is institutional, if this happened across the entire culture across decades, what exactly do I do with that? The honest answer is that naming it is necessary but not sufficient. You need a framework for doing something daily with what you now understand. That's what Order Your Soul First is built to be, a 30-day practice workbook that takes Kirk's concept of the soul before the Republic and translates it into one page a day, a reflection, a question, a practice. Not more content to consume. Something to do. If you want that, it's in the link in the description. But there's something deeper still to address. Something the video hasn't fully named yet. The drift we've been tracing in the church, in the school, in the wider culture, is not only the story of institutions making bad decisions. It's the story of a faculty being systematically starved. The moral imagination requires nourishment. It feeds on certain things. Literature that takes human dignity seriously enough to dramatize its violation. Ceremony that participates in realities larger than the ceremony itself. Silence that is not merely the absence of noise, but the presence of something older. Continuity with the dead. Not nostalgia for a past that was prettier, but genuine conversation with people who faced the permanent things and left a record of how they faced them. These are not decorative. They are not the accessories of a cultured life. They are the specific inputs without which the faculty atrophies, not all at once, but over years and decades, the way a muscle atrophies when it is not used. You don't notice the first month. You don't notice the second. By the time you notice, the loss is significant. And the loss feels like it's you, not the environment that stopped feeding what you needed. This is what Kirk meant when he argued that order in the soul must precede order in the commonwealth. Not as a spiritual platitude, as a structural claim. A person whose moral imagination has been starved cannot perceive what is at stake in a marriage, a tradition, a church, a nation. They can recite the arguments, they can hold the correct positions, but they cannot feel the weight of what they're defending. And when you can't feel the weight, you can't hold the line. You drift incrementally toward whatever is more immediately affirming. The Republic doesn't fail in Washington first, the soul before the Republic. Here is what this means, and this is the turn the video has been building toward. The flatness you've been feeling is not your spiritual failure. It is not the inevitable drift of aging. It is not nostalgia dressed up as principle. It is the accurate perception of a real loss. And that distinction between feeling wrong and perceiving correctly changes everything. Here is why it matters. Animals don't mourn the loss of the moral imagination. A civilization that has lost it entirely doesn't grieve the absence. It simply stops feeling the absence. Because the faculty that registers the absence is gone, you are grieving. Which means the faculty is not gone. The hunger you carry home from a church that used to feed you, that hunger is the moral imagination still working. It knows what it needs. It knows what it isn't getting. The shame you feel about the conversations you didn't have with your children or grandchildren, the ones where you stayed silent because you couldn't find words that didn't sound like criticism, that silence is not failure. It's the pressure of something real that doesn't yet have language, and language is exactly what Kirk provides. The grief is not nostalgia. The grief is real perception, and real perception, in a civilization organized around the idyllic imagination, around the premise that what you feel is what is real, that what affirms you is what is true, real perception feels like malfunction. It looks like the problem being yours. It isn't. Kirk lived this out in a way that is not incidental to his thought. It is the argument itself. He married late, at 45, a woman named Annette, who would become the keeper of Piety Hill long after he was gone. He built his library in Mecosta, Michigan, in a house that held the books of demolished libraries, the volumes of civilizations that had been scattered when their owners died or their buildings fell. He was not romanticizing the past. He was engaged in deliberate conversation with the dead. He was practicing what he preached, the soul ordered first. The home, built from the permanent things. The library, a partnership with those who faced the same questions before him. He converted to Roman Catholicism in 1964, already famous, already established. Not as a strategy, not as a credential, but as the conclusion of a man who had spent his life tracing the moral imagination to its source and found that the source had a name. He died at Piety Hill in 1994. He is buried there. The dead in conversation with the living, this is what a life ordered by the moral imagination looks like. Not perfect, not without cost, but possessed of what the parking lot Sunday morning is missing. Wait, you are not too old for this. I want to say that plainly, because it's the objection that hasn't been voiced yet, but that you may be carrying. The sense that understanding what you've lost is useful information, but not much else, that the time for doing something about it has passed. Kirk would reject that with some force. Not with comfort, exactly. With precision. The second half of life is not the retreat from significance. It is, for the person whose moral imagination is intact, the moment when the accumulated weight of a life lived in contact with the permanent things becomes available to children, to grandchildren, to the communities that desperately need someone who can name what has been lost. The vocabulary is the first act. The naming of the grief is the beginning, not the end. What you now know, that what was taken has a name, that the taking has a documented history, that the hunger is not failure but perception. That is not merely interesting. It is equipping, the soul before the Republic. Always, still, even now. Before I go, tell me the moment you first felt it. The moment something that used to carry weight stopped feeling like it had any. Not what you think in general. The specific moment, I want to read those.